This is the 2020 Lexus RCF. It's got 472 horsepower and it goes 0 to 60 in under 4 seconds, but no one is buying it. This RC competes against things like the BMW M4, Audi's RS5, and Mercedes C63 AMG. However, it's selling in small numbers compared to those two. And today we're going to find out why. First, I'm going to show you around the 2020 Lexus RCF and show you all the interesting quirks and features. Then we're going to get it out on the road and see how it drives. And then I'm going to give it a jug score. And for more of my thoughts on this Lexus RCF, click the link in the description below, autotrader.com/over... No, I'm just kidding. I've done 2 other videos on this thing. I put it up against the M4 and a C63, and I did a separate video against the Mustang, so check those videos out. They'll be in the description. Now, what better place to start on a 5-liter V8 from Lexus than under the hood? And one interesting quirk you'll find under here is that the engine is a little bit more special than you're used to seeing. Now, Lexus's F-Series or F-model cars, their specific color is blue. BMW has their blue, purple, and red. Mercedes is very silver focused and their silver arrows. And the Lexus color is blue, and you'll find that the manifold on top of the engine matches that blue. Another interesting feature you'll find on here is that your engine is covered by this plastic vanity cover. Now, that's not particularly interesting. A lot of cars have that these days. However, what is interesting is that you have an F stamped on there, surrounded by the same blue that you just found on the manifold. Additionally, you have some of the fakest looking carbon fiber that I've ever seen. Come on, Lexus. We don't need that. Now, another interesting piece of the Lexus RCF is the styling. There's no secret that Lexus's styling is polarizing for some, but it absolutely stands out. And for that, it adds a lot of character to the car. One of the things that you get, and an interesting quirk about any F-Series, and even the F-Sport trims, is that you get this kind of black chrome spindle grille. Now, this is a bit more aggressive, and you have some carbon fiber down here, making it look very rough and tough and fast and brutal and all those sports car words that you're used to hearing. Additionally, one of the interesting styling cues that Lexus has taken is their check mark. Now, this headlight design used to be integrated beneath this headlight, where it used to be 1, 2, 3 for the projectors, but now they've integrated it into the headlight casing, and I just don't know how I feel. Now, as we start to make our way around the side of the Lexus RCF, you'll notice that there are more F things on the side as well. You have this big gill behind your front wheel, which should extract air from the tire, and well, I can't really seem to find where the air would come out, so I don't think it's functional. Another interesting quirk of the Lexus RCF is this little mud flap that comes out on your back wheel well. You might think, oh, that's a bit odd, it's just this long, and you'd be right. However, the reason for this being is the fact that in every country, there are certain regulations and standards that cars have to meet, and this car just doesn't. And the one that it doesn't meet is the fact that this rear bumper comes in and exposes some of the wheel. The interesting bit is, the little mud flap is up here, and it doesn't expose the tire until way down here. Another interesting quirk about this RCF, and we'll continue with the idea that Lexus is the king of styling, or over-styling, depending on how you want to say it, and you have this aggressive rear bumper. It's got a little vent back here that's supposed to extract air, but again, nothing channeling from the wheel well, so I'm not really sure what it's for other than styling. Now, one other interesting feature, as it's been explained to me, is that the taillights on the left side are meant to look like an L, and they do. However, they're symmetrical, and so this one is supposed to be a J. Lexus? In any case, around back, another interesting quirk is that you'll have an adjustable rear spoiler. It deploys at a certain speed, but there's also a button in the cabin that you can push and deploy your spoiler so everyone knows you have an F. And in case anyone missed that, you have some of the most interesting and quirky design elements of any Lexus F product, and it's the stacked tiered diagonal exhaust. You have quad exhaust like you would in a Mercedes AMG or a BMW M car. However, it's arranged in such a pattern that's quite interesting and, dare I say, quirky. Moving on from that, you also have a carbon fiber rear diffuser that looks very aggressive and very Lexus and very F and R and S and all those sporty letters. Now, sticking with the back, we're going to talk about the trunk, and this is a performance coupe, so you would expect there not to be a whole lot of room or practicality, but alas, you would be wrong. There is plenty of room back here for a reasonable amount of things. Plus, you have a first aid kit that just buckles in here just so, in case you get into an accident or crash as you're ripping around in your Lexus RCF. And then one of the most interesting quirks of the trunk is the fact that you have this massive warning label in the trunk, making sure that if you put skis up through there, they're going to likely go all the way up to the front of the cabin. So Lexus and Toyota is not responsible if you scratch your dashboard with your skis. Now, as we move our way up the Lexus RCF, we have to talk about back seats, because this car has some, but only technically just so. I'm not sure why they include seats like this, and their new LC convertible is an even greater testament to this. They're not really usable by any human with legs, so amputees only back there, but for your enjoyment, I'm going to try to get back there. And as we get in, I have to talk about another interesting quirk of the RCF. You have these amazing sport bucket seats, and of course in any coupe fashion you have this leather tassel that will keep your seatbelt attached to your seat so you don't lose it. However, the interesting thing is, it's magnetic. In any case, when we get back here, we'll just pull this lever up here and the seat whirs into place. Still whirring. Still whirring. And now I'm able to get in to the back seat of my Lexus RCF. They don't make it easy. It is a short roof, and once you're back here, it's not all that bad, really. You have a second seat next to you, but in between you have this cup holder that's covered with a little slidey thing that has the Lexus F on it to remind you that you are in an RCF. I'll try to pull this seat back and it will whir back into place, and at some point it will make contact with my knees, and it has, and it continues to go back until it puts on too much force, and then it readjusts itself to go forward. And while I'm back here, I may as well talk about one more feature. You have rear AC and HVAC vents. However, that's really the only accommodation you have back here. There's no map pockets. There's a couple speakers in the middle of the door, or where the door would be if this were a sedan. But these air vents, they have to be pointed directly up as high as they can, otherwise they'll just blow onto where you would have your drinks. And now as we move up to the cockpit and the front seat of our RCF, we have to talk about the interior. Specifically, let's start with the design. Now, personally, Mercedes does a very simple and elegant design, and that's fine. However, judging by the outside of this Lexus, you can probably guess that that's not what's going on here. You have a little bit more things going on from a stylistic perspective, namely these seats. They are heated, they are cooled, and they are some of the most intricate and interesting stitching and composed seats I've ever seen. Outside that, you have Lexus's typical steering wheel. It's big, it's beefy, and it has an F on it. There are very few Fs in this car, unlike any BMW M product. There's one on the back cup holder here, there's one on the steering wheel, and then there's one in the gauge cluster. However, outside of that, you have a very similar center stack here where you can control your seats and your drive modes and your heated steering wheel and your temperature. And one of the nicest things in here is how you control your temperature. You can touch the red arrow to go 1 degree hotter, or the blue arrow to go 1 degree cooler, or you can run your finger along this metal strip and adjust your temperature in a slidey and elegant fashion. After all, this is a Lexus. But before we get too in-depth on that, I have to talk about build materials, and one of the things that you can do to test the build quality on a car like this is to try to shake the center console, and this thing doesn't budge. Additionally, you have to take into account the multiple use of fabrics and textures in here, as that makes a car feel more premium and expensive. And you have rich and supple leathers here, you have suede Alcantara here, and on the dash you have brushed aluminum and just carbon fiber bits everywhere. Everything is so upscale. There's a reason that Lexus is king of the interior. Now, when you get into your Lexus RC and you hit the start button, the car will rev into life. And on the left side of your gauge cluster, you will have a graphic that says Lexus RC. However, it doesn't say F, until you wait a little bit longer, which is a little bit interesting, knowing that you paid for an F and you don't get to know about it or tell your passengers about it until a couple seconds later. And then staying with the gauge cluster, I want to talk about the font on the speedometer. In eco mode, you have a very modern and contemporary font on your speed. However, when you turn it into Sport or Sport Plus, you get this very digital and old school kind of geometric design that looks like it came from an alarm clock. And then to the right of your gauge cluster, you have Lexus's Inform infotainment system, and this is where the fun begins, because Lexus has gotten a lot of flack for this system over the years, and they have made an improvement with this remote touch. Used to be the kind of mouse pad joystick sort of thing, and that was terrible. And this system, well, it's marginally better, but still kind of terrible. However, you won't be paying too much attention because you'll be busy driving your RCF, and when you do so, you'll have to put it in gear with this gear lever. And an interesting quirk about this is, like we talked about with the F badges and the exhaust or the manifold on the engine, is you have the Lexus F Blue, and you have it stitched onto the inside of your steering wheel and also onto your gear selector. I love the fact that they've done that little detail in making the white match with the seats and the blue match with the F-ness of this car. And so now that we've covered the Lexus RCF's exterior quirks and interior features, it's time to get this thing on the road and see how it drives. All right, now setting off in the Lexus RCF, one of the things that immediately stands out to you is the comfort of things. And this is a Lexus, and they are known for being old person cars, and I don't think that reputation is entirely earned, but there is one thing that is not debatable, and that this is the most comfortable car in this segment, especially when you consider rivals like the M4 and how their suspension is so rock hard and so aggressive and all that, and then you get into this Lexus and it's so floaty and comfortable in comfort mode, and well, it stays pretty floaty in sport mode. Now, one thing that's important to note is that in a lot of performance cars that are really aggressive, you get a dual clutch transmission. In a lot of Porsches and a lot of BMW M cars, you've gotten those transmissions. But in here, Lexus thinks, well, you don't need that. What you need is a torque-converted 8-speed automatic. And for most of the time, that's fine, but this is, after all, a sports performance car, and when you downshift on throttle, there is a bit of lag, and since it's not turbocharged, that sometimes can make it feel a little bit loafy. Steering also kind of follows that luxury car trend, and this what kind of makes this RCF a little bit more GT car than M4 competitor. It's very light, and there's no feedback, although the car does turn in quite well. And then when you do get to a corner, let's say you want to come up here and you want to downshift, and the gearbox takes a little bit of time to respond, but once you get there, then it does fine. And then when you're pushing it into a corner, you are very aware of the weight here, and that's something that you're not as aware of in competitors like the BMW. And I think it's because this car weighs 400 pounds more than the BMW M4. It still weighs a little bit less than the Mercedes C63, but the turbocharged engine on that kind of makes you forget about that a little bit, as there's a lot more low down power. In any case, dynamically it's fine. Like I said, the steering is very light and there's not a lot of feedback, but you have Michelin Pilot Sport 4S tires on here for an aggressive and sticky ride. You do have fixed dampers, so you can't really change the ride quality. It's not too stiff like the M4, but it is the most comfortable in terms of sport performance coupes, which is very Lexus. Ultimately, what it boils down to is this. This Lexus RCF can be thought of as the sophisticated man's muscle car, if you will. Now, arguments could be made that that's the AMG's territory. However, if you want a little bit more reliability and a little bit nicer riding quality, then this is what you want. And you don't miss out on the raucous and rowdy power and sound of a V8. So what this means is that in a straight line, it's got plenty of power and sound to keep you entertained, but in the corners you will lose time and performance and the whole experience of the track car thing, because this just isn't that. Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the RCF is interesting and aggressive, but not what I would consider timelessly beautiful. Plus, I'm not in love with the yellow paint and it gets a 5 out of 10. Acceleration, the RCF does 0 to 60 in 4.3-ish seconds, so it gets a 7 out of 10. Handling is decent. The sticky Pilot Sport 4S tires help, but there's no hiding the weight and it gets a 6 out of 10. Fun factor is probably the best thing about this due to the immaculate sound it makes, but it's still not as fast as rival and it gets a 7 out of 10. Cool factor, like fun factor, is strong, these are rare and have a great character, and they're also important because Lexus V8s are incredible, but they will undoubtedly be going away soon, so it gets an 8 out of 10 for a total weekend score of 33 out of 50. Next up are the daily categories, starting with features. The RCF has some nice stuff like launch control and a TVD, but the self-driving tech isn't phenomenal, it gets a 6 out of 10. Comfort is the high point in the segment with this RCF, and it gets an 8 out of 10. Quality is another place where this shines with diverse and high quality materials, and this should also get Lexus reliability, so it gets a 9 out of 10. Practicality is pretty standard for the segment, but those back seats are hardly usable, and it gets a 4 out of 10. Finally is value, and with a starting MSRP over $65,000 to start, it's not obscenely expensive, but I think there are several options I'd pick before this. However, on the used market you can find some older models for around 35 grand, which is a steal. Either way, I have to give value a 4 out of 10, bringing the daily score to 31 out of 50. Add them up and the total jug score is 64 out of 100. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and Doug, if you somehow magically find yourself watching this video, thank you for being a good sport, man. I love your channel and keep up the good work.